connect to a lot of what we're talking about. We're talking about these load increases that we're seeing, the need for new sources. So this is really kind of a timely topic, I think. So, and with that, I think we'll turn it over now to SEPA and to Garrett Fitzgerald and Brittany Blair. They are the Senior Director and Manager of Research and Industry Strategy for the Smart Electric Power Alliance, SEPA, and they're going to be presenting today on their new report on Vehicle to Everything and how we and the commissions can sort of prepare for this. They'll include discussion of interconnection as well. So with that, please take it away. You have we have some time, like 40 minutes or so scheduled for your presentation and for Q&A. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, commissioners, and thanks everyone. We are excited for the opportunity to share a little bit today. So my name is Garrett Fitzgerald, and I am the Senior Director of Transportation at SEPA. And I am joined by my colleague Brittany, who is going to be helping co-present this and was a lead on some of the work. Let me share my screen to give you guys something to look at. So what we're going to be talking about here, maybe just for the next 20 minutes, and then we'd like to have some questions and discussions before we go to our the speaker following us, is some learnings that we have gathered over the past 18 months on interconnection guidance for residential bidirectional EV charging systems. Before we jump into that, it may be helpful for those who are not familiar with SEPA, the Smart Electric Power Alliance, to give you an understanding of where this information comes from and the context behind it. So SEPA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have 1,100 members across the United States. 700 or so of those members are electric utilities of the IOU, muni, co-op, really all forms. And then the balance of our membership is every other type of stakeholder group. So corporations, vendors, state energy offices, commissions, national labs, etc. And what we do as an organization is we help our members accelerate the transition to a clean, affordable, and resilient electricity system. And we do that by convening members, developing research and resources that help folks do that. And we are focused primarily on three areas. We orient around grid and ensuring that the distribution grid is the backbone of the clean energy transition. As was mentioned earlier, we are helping utilities and other members manage this unprecedented load growth from data centers, electrification, industrialization. And then lastly, and this is a more recent focus of SEPA, is ensuring that the ideas to meet this transition look beyond the borders of just North America. So zooming in on what we're here to talk about today, SEPA convened 10 utilities over the course of 2024 and early 2025. And all of these utilities were in the process of evaluating their interconnection processes or procedures or rules as it relates to bidirectional EV charging. And we brought them together along with a number of non-utility stakeholders to really assess what is the state of interconnection, what needs to change, what can stay the same as we're considering interconnection for other DERs. And the result of this was a report that we've titled Interconnection Guidance for Residential EV Charging. Brittany, if you want, while I'm presenting, you can drop the link in there. The paper is available for free to the public and was intentionally built to educate utilities in commissions and commission staff on terminology and important considerations related to interconnection.
We have that in the chat. Brittany's dropped it in, so we're good. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So there's a lot on this slide, but really where I want to start is for the past several years, we've been talking about this technology as V2X or vehicle to everything. And over time, it's become abundantly clear that the X in the V2X matters when we're talking about, is it a vehicle to a load, to a grid or to the buildings. And what is happening is there are emerging sets of terminology that exist within sort of the auto OEM and their customer base, within the utilities programmatic teams and the programs they're developing, and then within distribution engineering and interconnection engineers. And they're not necessarily consistent, and there is some overlap. So I wanted to walk through these various terminologies and help kind of identify where this overlap exists. So vehicle to load simply means plugging in an appliance or an extension cord directly into the vehicle, and it is really not relevant to interconnection or to the utility at all. It is never grid tied. Vehicle to grid, on the other hand, is when we're talking about a system that is injecting power back into the grid, has gone through interconnection agreements, and the utility is aware of and potentially utilizing this as an asset. Vehicle to home or vehicle to building sits in the middle, and this is where some overlap exists. Vehicle to home can mean simply backup power, where you have the vehicle providing power to the home when the grid is out and that circuit is islanded from the utility system. It can also mean, in some cases, sending power to the home when the home is energized from the grid and connecting to the grid, and may not necessarily be sending power back to the grid. And so this is where some of the confusion comes in, and we make recommendations on being intentional about the terminology that we use. And so again, this vehicle to home and to grid is what we see more in the colloquial terms. But when you get into sort of the engineering side of it, the terms exporting or non-exporting and parallel or non-parallel come up, and there are some overlap. And I'm not going to go through this table in detail. We have a couple of pages within this report that really tries to simplify it. But the main point I'm trying to make here is there's a lot of terminology out there, and we're going to go through some more, and it's not necessarily consistent. So it's really important that those who are, responsible for this space understand the various system designs and configurations that bidirectional can take, so that we can ensure we get the most value from the vehicles to the customer and to the grid. And where SEPA has made a recommendation is when we use the term vehicle to home, it probably makes the most sense for that to be used for non-parallel backup operations, where really that system is not interacting with the grid, and vehicle to grid is reserved for parallel operations where that system is operating with the grid. And the next step in that, and why all of these different configurations matter, is because if you are operating only islanded from the grid, you will likely be a load-only mode or used for backup power and are not required to go through any interconnection processes. And that simplifies the experience for the customer, but it has implications for this technology in the future. If you've only gone through an energization pathway, we're unlikely going to be able to utilize that asset for grid services. So the thing to keep in mind, though, is when a customer buys an EV and potentially gets the bidirectional capability, their primarily purpose of this vehicle is for driving. And so really the primary condition is going to be as a load, and discharging back to the grid is really a secondary purpose. And so there are implications for requiring a customer to go through interconnection if they never really intended to use their vehicle for the bidirectional capabilities. And so really what we get into in the report is recognizing that there are trade-offs when you require all customers to go through the interconnection pathway. And really those trade-offs have to do with customer experience, complexity, and safety. So a customer that is operating in an islanded mode that's never interacting with the system, that allows them to go through the process quicker and at a lower cost and sort of with less complexity. However, operating in that islanded mode still requires software and hardware that ensures that system is not backfeeding to the grid and is not connected to the grid when the grid is live. And for that reason, there are a number of utilities that have gone down the path of requiring interconnection in many cases, and that provides a couple of benefits. One is grid safety and additional opportunities for review. So when a system goes through interconnection, utilities are better equipped to ensure the customers have the hardware that are needed to prevent any backfeeding. Similarly, there are a number of programs that are designed to help cover the cost of electrification, whether that is a panel upgrade or a level 2 charger. And by going through an interconnection process when the system is installed, sometimes customers can benefit from existing programs that are put in place to lower the cost of these upgrades. And lastly, is sort of in the forward-looking sentiment, a customer that goes through energization only and thinks of their system as only operating when the grid is down may be precluded from participating in future programs that could take advantage of that relatively large asset. And if they were to need to go through another process of interconnection, it could be a deterrent. And to add even more complexity to these conversations and more acronyms, there are different ways of configuring the AC-DC conversion. So often you'll hear about, is it bidirectional AC or bidirectional DC? And really what that means is the conversion of the direct current from the battery happening on the car, or is it happening on a stationary inverter? And to date, the majority of installations with school buses and residential chargers has been with the off-board inverter, so V to G DC. And there are now sort of some conversations, some announcements, and some general expectations that the onboard inverter V2G AC is likely to be more common than it has historically. I can't speak to where we'll end up in the long term, but I think the point to be made is there are implications for how we write rules and regulations and what standards are applicable for the V2G AC versus DC. And really what this means is because the market is still evolving the technology, regulation and sort of utilities approach to this technology is going to have to be adaptable as this technology continues to mature. And with that, I tried to paint the picture of all of the different things that we need to consider when we're thinking about interconnection bidirectional charging. But Brittany is going to provide a little bit more of a on the ground where the rubber meets the road example of what some states have been doing. And I'll hand it over to you, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. So as part of our work, we tracked what 5 different states were doing throughout the US to prepare for this. I will first do a little bit of a deep dive on what Maryland did this previous year and then what that was, what they were doing similarly to the other states. So for some more context on Maryland, last year the General Assembly passed the Drive Act to prepare for more electric vehicle adoption. So this has provisions for managed charging and the vehicle to grid, bidirectional charging goals, and also a little bit more forward looking for virtual power plants and how all this will integrate together. So that act directed both the commission and utilities to prepare for bidirectional charging. And to prepare for this, the commission had their ongoing interconnection work group that focuses on small generator interconnections. They do everything from looking at FERC 2222 to hosting capacity maps and now bidirectional charging. They were tasked with updating the Code of Maryland Regulations, so COMAR, to include explicit language around bidirectional charging, and they made it pretty comprehensive. So the foundation of that update to the language was they utilized existing language on energy storage, expanded the definition to include bidirectional charging. They did add caveats that the technologies are a little bit different. So they may be batteries on wheels, but they are a little bit different. So they said that everything that stationary storage has doesn't always apply to bidirectional. So they did add that provision. And then they also did address this V2G DC versus AC. As Garrett said, there are a little bit different standards and certifications the two different technologies need to meet. For V2G DC, this has a smart inverter off board the vehicle, so that meets the same smart inverter requirements seen in other interconnection agreements. So California's Rule 21 specifies that smart inverters have to meet UL 1741 SB standards. So kind of these different certification pathways as the market evolves to ensure that these are still meeting grid requirements. As part of that, they did address what Garrett said of this charging paradigm of some customers want to be able to utilize their chargers sooner just for the charging aspect and do bidirectional later. So they had this energization pathway where customers could install it in this what they're calling V1G ready or unidirectional mode. So this doesn't need an interconnection agreement because it's charging just like any other charger would do so. But if they wanted to switch to bidirectional mode, or what Maryland is calling V2G ready, they would have to go through an interconnection agreement. And they also added language that to switch the modes, it would have to be through the manufacturer approved third party to ensure that all of the safety, software, and hardware requirements were in place and the customer just wasn't doing it themselves. So they had a lot of language around the different configurations of the systems, as well as a little bit more future looking with the different pathways. And then Garrett, on the next slide, I have a table showcasing what are some of the first steps different state commissions have taken. As I said, we looked at 5 different commissions, California, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, and New York. And there are some similarities between what they were doing. So California, Maryland, and New York have that energization for the load-only chargers. They did specify that interconnection is required for any parallel operations. And then what's interesting about some of the earlier commissions who have had bidirectional chargers on their systems is that 1741 SB waivers. So as I was saying, UL 1741 is a grid requirement for smart inverters. A lot of the chargers had not yet moved to SB standards, so they needed waivers through the commissions to be able to participate. This is starting to sunset in these commissions largely this summer and the end of this year because the market has started to catch up and be able to implement those certifications in the chargers. We are still waiting on SC to be released, so that's another thing that will come down the pipeline in the next few years. So as you can see, it's a bit of an evolving marketplace for the different certifications. I'd like to highlight one more commission here. Michigan had also had a case where Ford wanted to have customers energize their systems because they were operating in non-parallel mode. So the commission allowed Ford to do this because they brought in their experts and talked through their software and hardware, proving that they had all the right safety mechanisms in place to ensure there was no backfeeding, and this all happened in non-parallel mode. The caveat being that this is only applicable for the Ford system, because that was what they were looking at in that case. So these are a little bit different approaches that the commissions have taken, but mostly the waivers and then creating those energization and interconnection pathways. And then next slide, Garrett. No, one more. Yes. So from our report, we have different recommendations for the commissions. To reiterate, there needs to be some language updates for energization interconnection rules. So far, it's not been enough just to have energy storage interconnection rules. There have had to be additional provisions allowing bidirectional charging to fit under that technology, particularly for those different system configurations for the parallel exporting, non-exporting configurations. And then the next two bullet points, the market is still really early days. We may have been hearing about bidirectional charging for a very long time. The technology does work, it exists, it's been tested, but utilities still need to understand how customers expect to interact with the grid, what types of incentives they need to be able to participate in grid services. So a lot of piloting and evaluation still needs to occur on the utility side before this really can scale. The market is still really early days. As we talked with utilities and different industry folk over the last year, many utilities still have less than 10 customers who have requested interconnection. So it's not been too many yet, and that's why they're in this preparation stage for more interconnection. And to that end, the market's still evolving. As Garrett said, we've heard a little bit from the industry that there is some talk about moving to V2G AC, so interconnection pathways will need to remain adaptable for these technology changes. And then also, as there has been more interconnection, they've been occurring in a more of an ad hoc fashion. And there has been some talk that the costs have been quite high for these interconnections. So as we move towards more standardization, just ensuring that those fees are reflective of the true costs for customers to ensure that it is easier for them to interconnect, especially as if we want more customers to go through an interconnection pathway for future grid services. And then lastly, not many markets allow bidirectional charging to participate in grid services. So more commissions will need to either expand current programs or create new mechanisms for customers to be incentivized to export to the grid. So there's some future foundation that needs to be laid on the compensation side of things. And then the last slide for me, in conclusion, bidirectional charging has a lot of really great capabilities for the grid. It does increase the amount of grid support that customers can have both through demand response and virtual power plant services, but it's going to take some foundation from utilities and the regulatory commissions for customers to interconnect and to be able to participate in grid services. So our key takeaways from our work is that bidirectional charging is here. We're starting to see some acceleration in the market. And so we have time to prepare now while adoption is still low, but we do need to start doing that soon. And that there is some balance between allowing energization pathways versus interconnection in terms of those safety and reliability trade-offs. And lastly, a lot of this is going to require collaboration across utilities, regulatory commissions, and the vehicle and charger manufacturers. So having continued dialogue between all parties as the market continues to settle will be an important consideration. And then that was another link to the report, but it's already in the chat. So if anyone doesn't have it, happy to put it back. But it's also there.
Well, thank you both, Garrett and Brittany, for the report and for your presentations today. And I think we have time for a few questions from you now before we go to our next speaker. But are you both able to stay on until the end of the hour? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are happy to do so.
Okay, so questions for SEPA. So I'll have a question. When this foundation is laid, right, that you've talked about, right, we have some lead time. What are the projections? This is not, this is a little bit asking you to sort of look out in the future, where this really starts to move the needle in terms of bidirectional.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, and I think the one way I'd answer it is the magnitude of the resource could be so large that we're not really talking about needing 40% or 30% of customers opting into this technology. I think even 10% still provides very large levels of storage and flexibility that could be unlocked. That said, for me, it's almost too early to predict when this will happen. What we are seeing is in the past 2 or 3 years, a pretty large shift in the way that OEMs are talking about this, from being a little bit reluctant, not wanting to talk about warranty and impact on the batteries,
Right.
to sort of being leading with this as a differentiator, as a technology that they want to incorporate into the future lineup of their vehicles. And Zach will likely be able to speak with more detail, but a number of auto OEMs have made announcements for more and more bidirectional capabilities in 2026 and 2027 models. So I think we're just at that tipping point, but if it accelerates or if it sort of stagnates, really depends on the environment we set up for customers to opt into this. If there's not money or value for them, they're not going to choose to do this. It does cost more, and it does require going through hoops, for lack of a better word, to get you all set up. So I'd say time will tell. I think it's our opportunity to lose, but we're getting there in the next couple of years to really see which direction this goes.
I can
and
add a
go ahead, please.
yeah, I can add a little bit
Yeah.
more for I think the potential of the vehicles. So last year we also studied managed charging programs, and the average managed charging program had about 0.5 kilowatts of load reduction per EV participating in those programs, versus, because this could be sending 7 kilowatts, 9 kilowatts out of the vehicles during an event, that the scale could be quite larger for them. So as Garrett said, you don't need as many participating. The other side of that too, what we noticed in doing this work is that utilities have far more customers who have bidirectional capable vehicles, but they don't have the whole setup of the system. So to also take the system cost coming down to do the bidirectional backup system or the vehicle to grid system. So it'll also depend on that side of things for customers, but we may have a lot more vehicles out there with these capabilities than will actually be participating.
Really, really great information. And you sort of, Garrett, preempted another question that I have, which is this, when I first came into this, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of downplay by the OEMs, on bidirectional, right? Battery degradation, as you said, and you say that seems to be that narrative is changing now, because that reinforced seemed for customers at that time, just kind of stay away from this for now anyway. So the batteries are becoming sort of better, less degradation in bidirectional mode. Is that what's actually happening? Are the OEM just getting sort of the confidence, or as you say, is it just distinguishing selling points now?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. But really, I think the major driving factor is batteries have been getting better and better every year. We're even in the past 10 years, I think battery costs have come down 12 or 13x. But at the same time of costs coming down, we as an industry have been able to better understand what happens under different duty cycles, and just having that confidence to say we've run these batteries for X number of cycles gives them the confidence to incorporate that into the warranty. Now, again, maybe this is a question for Zach when he joins, as he represents the OEMs a little bit more closely. They are still nuanced on how they talk about this and the implications of injecting power. And I think the real thing to be seen is it depends on how heavily you're using your battery, right? If you're using it for backup power only, it's going to be an insignificant addition on the duty cycle compared to you driving it. But if you were bidding it into a frequency regulation market and cycling it up and down, that may have implications. And in fact, there are OEMs that say, we might not advise that. There are other OEMs that say actually a little bit of that is good for the battery. So I think it depends.
Great. Commissioner Paratek, question from you.
Yeah, thanks for this presentation. It's interesting to see what's happening across the country. So you had the list of states that were doing things on VIDA V2G or V2X or on vehicle integration. I guess my question is, are the states that are not listed for having some work there, is it implied that it's not possible to connect with this technology, or have you looked into that at all? I say that because you highlighted the Michigan declaratory ruling that was requested by Ford on saying that their just vehicle to home capabilities are not required to have an interconnection agreement, which honestly, like, it's basically just like a non-binding. It's a declaratory ruling which can only be binding on the company that requests it, and Ford requested it, and we don't regulate them. So so it's not even binding on them. So in reality, it actually is binding on nobody. But we knew that at the time. Like this was not necessarily meant to be like a regulation that would have like a binding effect. It was more meant to be a message to all, not just to Ford, to all OEMs that, you know, this is something that is possible within the existing rule sets, and they knew that at the time. Like this was all we were very open about all of this. I think I even might have mentioned that in my bench comments when we issued that order. So it was more meant to just like be able to explain that like our existing rules allow for this. And we also recently rewrote our interconnection and DG standards, like the rules around them, to make sure that it would include V2G and that would be allowed under the existing interconnection agreements and requirements. But we didn't like write them for V2G, right? Like we were revising the rules in our normal course of rule revision business at the commission. And as we were revising them, just kept a lens on to make sure like, okay, let's make sure that this actually will work for vehicles that want to connect at the same time. So I guess I'm just, my question is, are those the list of things that you had, was that specifically for states that are being, that are like describing what they're doing as being for V2G, or is it, or should it be implied that all the states that were not there are not allowing V2G?
So I think a couple things. I wouldn't take that as an exhaustive list. It may be, and again, I would also ask Zach to chime in when he jumps on. But I think that's where we found that there were active changes being made to enable more clarity for bidirectional EVs. There are other utilities that were not mentioned there in other states that we know are interconnecting systems primarily in the backup power mode and sort of thinking what it means when they might be operating in parallel, but they're doing so sort of under, as you mentioned, maybe their existing interconnection rules, but they're taking a lot of extra caution and treating it as like this is a one-off system that we're going to go and verify that it's operating in the same way that we think it would needs to. And I imagine, or I would speculate that changes will be needed in all jurisdictions to add that clarity of how these different systems are treated or can be treated.
I think the difference also, what we were seeing was on the residential versus the commercial side. So I know Colorado has allowed some bidirectional chargers to be sited on it was like a city site, and so but it was a commercial level charger, so it was like an ad hoc agreement between that site and the utility. So it just hasn't been as like formalized there, but Zach has more context. I see his hand raised.
And Zach, we were going to go to you for your report anyway, so if you want to use this to transition in, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to, but I don't want to. I was going to chime in specifically on this interconnection item, but I can also come back to it later if there are other questions from commissioners or staffers on the phone first.
No, if you want to hit this question now while it's before us, that'd be great. And then just move to your presentation. That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah. So just starting with this question, and here I'll join you guys. Camera here. Yeah. So you know, there are areas that grid parallel systems have been interconnected in, Colorado, Illinois, I think Rhode Island, Virginia as well, that did not move through a interconnection reform, either a broader reform of the regulations or a reform focused on bidirectional charging. I would also call what happened in California in a 2020 decision from the commission was more, to Commissioner Peretick's point, about clarification and providing a signal and direction to the industry and to stakeholders than it was about truly reforming any regulations. And that's also written in their decision, that sentiment of clarifying. And then in Massachusetts and New York, those examples that Brittany and Garrett brought up, those dealt primarily with that UL exemption, which is not sort of a broader overhaul, either within a broader interconnection reform or as an isolated V2G focused effort. And then I'll also say that Nevada and Texas are kind of dealing with this right now. And so we're engaged there the same way that we have been in California and Maryland. So all that's to say, maybe I back up a moment and introduce myself, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. And I also want to thank SEPA for their presentation and just overall their work. For those that don't know, we have forged a partnership with SEPA to facilitate a lot of VGI-related work through something we call our Utility Collaboration Forum. But in any case, let me pull up my slides. Are you all able to view my screen?
It's on the way. There we are. Yep, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And hopefully the SEPA folks can stay on too and weigh in on this, because I think they're really well researched and have talked to a lot of folks, especially utilities, on these topics. So VGIC, we believe that EVs represent untapped potential beyond mobility as distributed energy resources to unlock a secure and affordable energy future. Hopefully that's a statement that folks can agree with. We are focused primarily on this topic, so managed charging, bidirectional charging, and what we call DER paired charging solutions. So I get the privilege to focus on this specific solution set with these stakeholders on the slide here. These are our 45-ish members, as Garrett had previewed earlier, primarily automakers. We have nearly every light-duty automaker, several medium and heavy-duty automakers, as well as charging companies, aggregators, other software providers, and we have some munis and co-ops and CCAs in our associate membership at the bottom there. We look at VGI as a broad umbrella, all the ways that EVs can interact with the grid and increase the value proposition of EVs for customers, for fleets, across residential, heavy-duty trucking, everything in between. And I think what we're really focused on today is this, bidirectional charging topic. We separated out into the grid isolated or islanded and grid parallel. You're going to keep seeing this demarcation, and you saw it very clearly in SEPA's slides as well, kind of energization versus interconnection, or islanded versus grid parallel. That's borrowed from what our conversations with distribution engineers has revealed, right? That there is this very clear line for their operations right there in whether a bidirectional charging system is grid isolated or grid parallel. You may not see so much of a focus on acronyms from us. The V2L, V2H, V2B, V2G, as Garrett alluded to, the automakers use them for marketing purposes. I think utility programs and rates may use them in different ways. And not yet mentioned, but the standards bodies also have a whole compendium of definitions and terminologies and acronyms for those terms. So we just try to keep it a little bit more narrowly focused on those items. Oh, let me see if I can erase this. There we go. Why do we focus on this? We want to reduce the vehicle total cost of ownership, and we believe that having more opportunities for customers to manage their EV charging according to a rate or program, or even earn through a bidirectional charging arrangement can help lower that total cost of ownership. This is particularly valuable for commercial fleets, whether light duty or medium and heavy duty, because they use total cost of ownership calculators a little bit more rigorously. It's less of an emotional decision, or, hey, I want to buy that cool looking car. but this, underlying cost of the rates and any programs available to them really can help accelerate their decision to electrify their fleet. We want to support the evolving power sector, right? Having more batteries, having them at the grid edge, really valuable for the broader evolution of our power sector and the load growth and growth in DERs. We want to increase affordability of electricity, right? To the extent that we can mitigate, defer, and avoid distribution system investments and transmission, generation, capacity. We want to do that by more efficiently using the wires we already have, and in doing so, at least mitigating any upward pressure on rates, and ideally even or upward trajectory of rates, and ideally placing downward pressure on rates. Improving grid resilience and security, that one's intuitive from the bidirectional charging side of things. Using your vehicles as backup power. It's a huge battery, typically in your driveway, in your garage, parking lots. And lastly, fostering economic activity. I know this is out of scope for a lot of utility commissions, but it's something we think about a lot. A lot of these companies that I flashed on the screen earlier have headquarters, installers, manufacturing, et cetera, in the US, and a lot of the states represented here. There was a question about forecasts, so I quickly pulled this slide and dropped it in. I had the privilege of watching SEPA go first and hearing the questions, so I was able to add some slides. There's some estimates from Wood Mackenzie, more recently from Brattle, on the amount of bidirectional charging sort of capacity that can be expected. These are ultimately estimates. We don't have the crystal ball, but I can assure you that automakers, as Garrett mentioned, are seeming to take this much more seriously than they had in years previous, and are sort of showing up, so to speak, a little bit more, especially in these more in the weeds regulatory proceedings where we need to understand how to sort of make progress and unlock this value for ratepayers and for participating customers. I will also note on the topic of forecasts, we've had the Nissan Leaf, for example, that's been a bidirectional charging vehicle since model year 2013. California's sold, I think, 35,000. I'm guessing the rest of the country's probably sold another 35,000 in the last 15 years. I think the main sort of chicken and egg is like we've had that vehicle capacity, that battery capacity out there, but without the clear value proposition for the customer, whether it be backup power or earning through a program or a rate. It's been that uptake and real utilization of those batteries has been really slow. I'd also say just, proof is in the pudding on the automakers' commitments. Every General Motors EV right now, except for I think the Hummer, is capable of bidirectional charging. And we do have more battery capacity in EVs, I know certainly in California, than all other energy storage, both behind the meter and in front of the meter in California. And I'm willing to bet that statistic holds nationally and internationally as well. Because again, these batteries, even measured as the capacity of the onboard charger, are significant. And so there's a lot of capability, millions of vehicles out there. We don't need everyone to participate, but even if we got 3, 5, 10% of customers enrolled in some sort of program or rate, the scale we've been looking at would be really putting a dent in our needs. Okay, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to get to questions. So I think a lot of the content moving forward, I'm going to kind of skip through, but I will be circulating these slides, and Danielle will be circulating these slides and available for follow-up questions. So just an insight into VGIC and the work we do. We are a 501c6 member-based trade association. So we are intervening in a lot of these utility commission proceedings and other efforts at state and federal agencies related to compensation. So rate cases, rate applications, program applications, technical items like interconnection rules, some of these more weedy and forward-looking questions about control architecture and DERMS platforms. And then on infrastructure and planning, how do we account for all of this as we do our system planning, our IRPs, our distribution planning, and how do we modernize some of our processes as needed? Some specific opportunities, again, a lot of text here, so I'm not going to highlight all of these. But I do think that that chicken and egg issue and ensuring this is all utilized is, comes down to rates and programs, right? Making sure that there are opportunities that are most importantly cost-based and not cost-shifty, right? I worked in the solar space before this and rooftop solar, and coming from that, I think it's refreshing seeing that the upfront costs of this equipment, especially in the long run, will look a lot lower than for rooftop solar systems or even stationary energy storage, right? The most significant CapEx for customers is the battery, and customers already bought that battery when they bought the vehicle. So you don't need quite as high of a hurdle to pay customers, right? So it can be truly cost-based export compensation or programs that pass cost effectiveness testing and don't lead to some of the sort of legacy issues that we've had in this country around net metering and around cost shifts. So hopefully that's not too controversial to share with the NARUC crowd here, or may even be good to hear. But in any case, definitely wanting to see some progress on those rates and programs. VGIC's published a few items targeted at commissioners and utilities and staffers in the past few years. Most recently, best practices for designing programs in particular, so managed charging programs and pilots, or more forward-looking bidirectional charging programs and pilots. That was published in March. And then back in 2022, we published best practices for interconnection, and really grateful for SEPA for updating this, because I think it was sort of past due. And so I'm glad that Garrett and Brittany were able to work with some of the leading experts in the space and get that guidance updated, and add in, I think, some missing pieces there, and clarify some items. That said, this next one will look very familiar because Garrett and Brittany shared a version of this. And again, it's that demarcation between energization and interconnection for bidirectional charging systems, and making sure that we have appropriate treatment. This is actually originally based on some work that IREC did through the DOE-funded batteries project, which also helps to draw this demarcation. And you may notice, or ideally won't notice, the lack of acronyms here, right? This is really not about V2G, V2X, V2H, whatever. This is really about, are you parallel or not parallel? And the key takeaway from all of this is we likely don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So while there's some nuance and there are some specific items in interconnection rules and processes that could be updated to streamline bidirectional charging service connection and interconnection, we likely don't need to reinvent the wheel if we have existing frameworks for generators and backup power solutions on the left-hand side, and for small DERs on the right-hand side, solar and storage, for example. That said, there are some nuances, and Garrett and Brittany, I think, did an excellent job teasing that out. Let's see, I think, yeah, maybe I'll actually pause there for a moment, because I do want to mention that the V2G AC topic was brought up, right, where that inverter capability power conversion is onboard the vehicle, not offboard the vehicle. Just the latest sort of breaking news on that. UL shared yesterday in a public workshop that they expect to go to ballot, which is sort of the final formal step for the new V2G AC standard on September 25th. So I think that's this Thursday, right? So that's a very exciting step. That's been, about 5 years in the making, or arguably earlier, depending on what side of the issue you've been working on. And what that does is it treats the EV charging station as what I like to call kind of the babysitter, right? So it has this ability to not authorize the EV to export to the grid until and unless there's a successful handshake that verifies that EV will ingest the grid codes and behave appropriately at that point of the grid. So while it is sort of storage on wheels, it takes the focus in a lot of ways on the interconnection process, and keeps it on the charging station, and the sort of the DER system, which is formed once that vehicle arrives and that verification happens with the charging station. So don't need to get much more in the weeds than that. I think that's probably more than enough, but I'm happy to follow up with folks if they have more questions about that. But the headline is this V2G AC topic is really kind of turning a corner. It's very exciting. When it comes to bidirectional charging and sort of we call these, there are 4 pillars: interconnection, compensation mechanisms, upfront costs and CapEx support, and technical standards. And that last topic includes the interoperability standards, right? Making sure that there is, on the long term, a open market for vehicles and chargers to be compatible with one another, and folks aren't sort of locked into one ecosystem. That's a goal that I think everyone shares in the industry and utilities and commissions and broadly is best for customer experience, really. So this is how we break things down. This helps us take what is otherwise a pretty complex issue and work on it in the appropriate proceedings and appropriate venues and forums. Just a few really quick sort of case studies on some of these verticals. So New England, California, Maryland, some ways you can get paid or save money through smarter managed charging or bidirectional charging. Upfront cost support, also in California, New York, Massachusetts. Similarly, driving down that upfront cost and helping to underwrite, especially in these early days of market development when the equipment is more expensive than it will be once we get more economies of scale. This is really important set of tools. Granted, in a very challenging environment to find funding, either state, taxpayer, some of the market-based compliance mechanisms like LCFS in California, or ratepayer funds. And lastly, on interconnection, these were all covered in the SEPA item as well. I will note, I think the Massachusetts one is expired, that smart inverter requirement exemption. And with that, these are just take-home slides, because this is always the first question that we get, right, when we go to Q&A, is like, what are the products available? What are the vehicles chargers? So here's a quick list. I did these estimates in January on the amount deployed, so they're a little bit out of date right now. Here's the medium and heavy duty side, school buses primarily, some other models to come shortly, and then some more details on some of the technical capabilities of these chargers and vehicles, and cost to the extent that's available. So again, these are take-home slides. I'm not going to run through them. Oh, I will mention, even since this in January or February, Honda's released their announcement. We've had ChargePoint and Autel and Enphase all release announcements. So there's a lot more coming in terms of product availability, and that's very exciting. And then the medium and heavy duty side here as well. So that's all. I talked for a while, but hopefully I can stick around and answer some questions if folks have them. Thank you.
Thank you for talking for a while. We really appreciate it. What great reports. Garrett and Brittany and Zach, are you able to, we normally break at the hour and talk amongst ourselves, but I think it would be valuable if you could stick around, if you're able to, through the hour, and take some questions from the group. Are you guys okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Terrific. So with that, let's have some questions for our speakers. And I can't see Danielle with the screen up. There we go. Commissioner Rubin.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for these presentations. I was curious, Zach, you mentioned the sub-metering for utility billing, and would love to hear what you've seen in terms of whether there's been pushback from utilities on this concept.